Hi, my name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 36 years old. I live in Charleston, South Carolina, and I'm a proud single mother to my 7-year-old daughter, Lily. This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about what happens when you let people step on your boundaries and what happens when you finally stand up. Last Thanksgiving, my daughter was slapped across the face by my own brother in front of our entire family just for being too loud. What shocked me just as much? My parents laughed. They laughed. It's a memory etched into my mind, a cold, hard knot in my stomach that resurfaces every time I think of it. The aroma of roasting turkey, the warmth of the fireplace, the background hum of family chatter, it all seemed so idyllic, so perfectly normal for our annual Thanksgiving gathering at my parents' sprawling Charleston home. We had spent the morning exchanging pleasantries, navigating the usual passive-aggressive digs from my mother about my unconventional life as a single mom, and the detached indifference from my father. Lily, my vibrant, often boisterous 7-year-old, was, as always, my ray of sunshine amidst the carefully constructed politeness. She's a bright, curious child, and when she gets excited, her words tumble out, fast and enthusiastic, a whirlwind of ideas and observations. We were all gathered around the long dining table, laden with food. Lily, seated next to me, had been eagerly recounting her recent school project about sea turtles. Her voice, rising with her excitement, was certainly audible, but it was the innocent, joyful sound of a child sharing her world. Derek, my older brother, sat opposite with his perpetually stern expression. He's always been the family's resident disciplinarian, the one who knows best, and his temper has always been a short fuse. I remember catching his impatient gaze, a flicker of irritation in his eyes, but I dismissed it. This was Thanksgiving, after all. Family. Then it happened. Lily, mid-sentence, her hands gesturing animatedly, was met with a sudden, sharp crack. Derek's open palm connected squarely with her cheek. The sound was sickeningly loud, echoing through the sudden, stunned silence of the room. Lily's eyes, wide with confusion and pain, welled up instantly. Her hand went to her face, a red mark blooming on her pale skin. My breath hitched. The world seemed to tilt. I remember a small gasp escaping my lips, a sound of pure, unadulterated horror. But before I could even fully process what had just occurred, a sound from the other end of the table reached me, a sound that would forever haunt my nights. The unmistakable, light-hearted titter of my mother, followed by a deeper chuckle from my father. Laughter. They laughed. Not a sympathetic, nervous laugh, but a dismissive, almost amused sound, as if my daughter's pain was nothing more than a minor inconvenience, a dramatic display. My blood ran cold. The warmth of the room vanished, replaced by an icy dread. It wasn't just the slap, though that was unforgivable. It was their reaction. Their indifference, their implicit approval of my brother's violence towards my child. In that moment, surrounded by the people who were supposed to be my family, I felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. The betrayal was a physical ache in my chest, worse than any physical blow. They laughed. So I made sure they would never laugh at me or my daughter again. Have you ever been betrayed by your own family like this? Let me know below in the comments. And if you're ready to hear how I turn pain into power, smash that like button and subscribe. Because trust me, by the end of this story, someone loses everything. The air in my parents' grand dining room always felt thick with unspoken expectations and forced pleasantries on Thanksgiving. It was an annual ritual, a performance where everyone played their assigned roles, pretending to be a perfectly harmonious Southern family. My mother, Margaret, ever the hostess, flitted about with a strained smile, her eyes darting to ensure everything was up to her impossibly high standards. My father, Arthur, sat at the head of the table, a distant monarch in his own kingdom, interjecting only when absolutely necessary, usually with a minimizing comment or a wry, dry observation that left you feeling slightly inadequate. And then there was Derek, my older brother, who always seemed to bask in their approval, his presence dominating the room with a self-assured arrogance that grated on my nerves. I'd arrive each year, bracing myself. I call it the Monroe House Thanksgiving Gauntlet. From the moment I stepped through the door, the subtle digs would begin. Rachel, still single? You know, Lily needs a father figure. Or a backhanded compliment about my career, subtly hinting that it wasn't quite as respectable as Derek's. Lily, bless her innocent heart, was often oblivious to the underlying tension, her spirits too high to be dampened by the thick atmosphere. I always tried to shield her, to create a little bubble of warmth and normalcy within the cold formality of my childhood home. This particular Thanksgiving started like all the others. The scent of sage and roasting turkey filled the air, mingling with the clinking of silverware and the murmur of polite conversation. There were forced smiles all around, particularly when my mother cornered me, asking in a tone laced with thinly veiled criticism about Lily's unruly energy. Lily, meanwhile, was happily chatting away, her small voice rising above the general hum as she recounted, in vivid 7-year-old detail, her latest obsession, a school project on environmental conservation. Specifically, she was passionate about sea turtles. And Mrs. Henderson said if we all do our part, the baby turtles can make it to the ocean. Lily exclaimed, her eyes wide with earnestness, a small piece of cranberry sauce on her chin. She was sitting next to me, perched on 2 dining cushions so she could reach the table seat comfortably. Her little hands were animated as she described the life cycle of a turtle, her excitement making her speak faster and louder, her voice filled with an infectious joy. I smiled, my heart swelling with pride. She was so bright, so full of life. I was about to interject, maybe help her articulate a particularly complex part of her story, when I felt a shift in the room's energy. A stillness settled, almost imperceptibly at first, as if the air itself had grown heavy. I glanced across the table. Derek was watching Lily, his jaw set, a muscle ticking in his temple. His eyes were narrowed, a predatory glint within them that chilled me to the bone. I should have known. I should have done something. Lily, my mother interjected, her voice sharp. Lower your voice, dear. You're being quite loud. Lily, caught in her narrative, barely registered the reprimand. She continued, oblivious, her passion for sea turtles seemingly boundless. And then it happened. In one fluid, horrifying motion, Derek reached across the table, his hand arcing through the air. The sound was like a shot in the quiet room, a sharp, sickening crack. His open palm connected with Lily's left cheek, precisely, viciously. Lily's head snapped back, her small body jolting in her chair. The joyous light in her eyes extinguished instantly, replaced by a raw, disbelieving pain. A bright red mark bloomed on her cheek, stark against her pale skin. The room fell absolutely silent. Not a single person moved. The clinking of forks stopped. My breath caught in my throat, a scream lodged somewhere deep in my chest. Lily stared, tears welling, her lower lip trembling. I remember the stunned deer in headlights look on the faces of every other relative present. And then, from the head of the table, a soft chuckle started. My mother. She placed a napkin delicately to her lips, a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her shoulders. It was a sound of amusement, of dismissal. My father, next to her, let out a low, almost satisfied grunt, a sound that could only be described as a mirthless chuckle of his own. They laughed at the sound of my parents' laughter, still ringing in my ears, was like a physical blow. It was a cold, dismissive sound that drained all the warmth from the room, from my very soul. I remember an instinct taking over, a primal scream tearing itself from my throat. It wasn't a coherent word, just a raw, guttural sound of pure horror and outrage. No, I think I finally managed to bellow, my voice shaking the sudden silence that had fallen after their amusement died down. I lurched forward, my chair scraping loudly against the polished floor, my hands reaching for Lily. Her small body was trembling, her face crumpled, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. The red mark on her cheek burned, not just on her skin, but on my heart. I pulled her into my arms, holding her close, trying to shield her from the venom that seemed to permeate the very air of that room. She buried her back, in my shoulder, small sobs racking her frame. What in God's name, Derek? I shrieked, my eyes blazing as I looked at my brother, who sat there, remarkably composed, almost smug. He just shrugged, a slight smirk playing on his lips. Before he could even respond, my mother's voice, laced with her usual condescension, cut through the air. "Rachel, darling, please. Don't be so dramatic. He was just disciplining her. She was being a bit boisterous, wouldn't you agree?" She actually said that. Disciplining. As if smacking a defenseless child for the sin of being excited was a justifiable act. As if my daughter was a dog to be corrected. My father, ever the enabler, chimed in with his deep, uninflected voice. "Yes, Rachel. You really are overreacting. Lily needs to learn some manners. Derek was simply helping you out. Helping me out." The words felt like a fresh slap, this time directed at me. They were justifying it. Not only did they not condemn Derek's actions, they actively defended them. The other relatives, a silent Greek chorus of discomfort, either looked down at their plates or exchanged nervous glances. Nobody, not a single soul, spoke up or came to my defense. Their silence was as deafening as my parents' callous laughter. It was a reaffirmation of a long-standing family dynamic. Anything I did, anything that involved me, was open season for criticism, judgment, or outright dismissal. And my daughter, by extension, was fair game too. My mind reeled. I looked from my mother's prim, unyielding face to my father's distant, impassive gaze, then to Derek, whose expression seemed to say, "And what are you going to do about it, little sister?" The sheer audacity, the complete lack of remorse, the collective indifference to Lily's pain, it was too much. I felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and sharp, pushing through the shock and the heartbreak. It was a primal urge to protect my child, to remove her from this toxic environment. "How dare you?" I whispered, the words trembling with a rage so profound it stole my breath. "How dare you touch her? And how dare you, both of you, sit there and condone it?" I didn't wait for a response. I scooped Lily up, her small weight a comforting anchor in my trembling arms. Her sobs were muffled against my neck. I remember her saying in a small, broken voice, "Mommy, I didn't mean to be loud." And that tore my heart out all over again. "We're leaving," I announced, my voice steely now, though my hands were still shaking. I didn't care about the unfinished meal, the awkward stares, or the potential scene. My daughter had just been assaulted, and the people who were supposed to love and protect her had not only allowed it but endorsed it. My mother made a feeble attempt at protest. "Rachel, don't be ridiculous. It's Thanksgiving. We're just about to have dessert." Dessert. As if a piece of pie could erase the trauma of what had just happened. I didn't dignify that with a response. Clutching Lily, I elked out of that dining room, through the silent house, past the faces of family members who studiously avoided my gaze, and out the front door. The cool November air hit us, a welcome shock after the suffocating atmosphere inside. I practically ran to my car, fumbling with the keys, my vision blurred by tears of fury and despair. Lily was still crying softly, her head nestled against my chest. As I drove away, leaving that house and that family behind, I remember thinking, through my trembling and the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm me, that nothing would ever be the same. The fragile illusion of family harmony had shattered, exposing a dark, festering core. I couldn't breathe in that house, and they told me I was overreacting. But in that moment, clutching my sobbing daughter, I knew I was doing the only thing I could do. I was taking her and myself away from them. The drive home was a blurry journey through my own personal hell. Lily, after her initial burst of tears, had quieted, her small body curled against mine in the passenger seat. I kept glancing over at her in the rearview mirror, checking the angry red mark on her cheek, a fresh wave of nausea washing over me each time. I knew it wasn't just the physical mark. It was the emotional wound that truly terrified me. My vibrant, bubbly Lily reduced to a traumatized silence. That night, after I gently bathed Lily and tucked her into bed, singing her favorite lullaby, I just sat by her side, watching her sleep. The relief that she was finally safe in her own bed, away from them, was immense. But it was quickly replaced by a cold, burning anger. And then the crushing grief. The family I had always yearned for, the one I kept trying to fit into, had shown its true colors. They didn't care about me, not really. And worse, they didn't care about my daughter. For the next few days, a suffocating quiet descended upon our usually lively apartment. Lily was different. She was quieter, more hesitant. She used to chatter constantly about her day, about school, about her friends. Now her responses were clipped, her eyes often downcast. She would flinch slightly at sudden loud noises, a ghost of the slap still haunting her small frame. When I asked her about what happened, she would just shrug and say, "I was too loud, Mommy." My heart fractured into 1,000 pieces every time. She was internalizing their cruelty. She believed it was her fault. I spent those days in a fog of heartbreak and impotent rage. I'd try to distract Lily with her favorite activities, trips to the park, movie nights, but the shadow of that Thanksgiving dinner lingered. The pain in her eyes mirrored the pain in my own heart. But as the initial shock began to wear off, the sorrow slowly transmuted into something else, absolute, unadulterated fury. This wasn't just about one slap. This wasn't just about my parents' heinous laughter. This was the culmination of years of subtle slights, dismissals, and GHT disrespect. Years of allowing them to dictate my worth, to chip away at my confidence, to belittle my choices as a single mother. Years of them treating me as less than, and by extension, treating Lily as less than. My heartbreak was settling, hardening into a resolve as cold and sharp as steel. I called Nicole, my best friend, a few days after Thanksgiving. I poured out the entire story, the words tumbling out in a rush of tears and anger. Nicole, bless her, listened patiently, her quiet gasps of outrage a balm to my raw nerves. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Rachel," Nicole said, her voice soft but firm. "This isn't new, is it?" "Not really. It's just a much bigger, uglier version of what they've always done to you. And now they've done it to Lily." Her words hit me with the force of a revelation. She was right. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was an amplification of a pattern. The realization was sickeningly clear. Every time I had let a passive-aggressive comment slide, every time I had swallowed a hurtful remark to keep the peace, every time I had tried to earn their approval, I had inadvertently given them permission to continue. I had allowed them to step on my boundaries, not just once, but repeatedly. I had been a recovering people-pleaser, always trying to smooth things over, always hoping to finally measure up to their impossible standards. And where had that gotten me? My daughter slapped, and her grandmother and grandfather laughing. My hands clenched into fists. No, not anymore. This was the line. This was the breaking point. The pain was still there, a deep ache, but it was now fueled by a burning, resolute anger. This wouldn't just be the last time they disrespected me. This would be the last time they had any power over me or over Lily. The dust had settled, and in its wake, my rage had truly begun to simmer. This was no longer just about feeling hurt. It was about fighting back. After that conversation with Nicole, a switch flipped inside me. The simmering rage wasn't just heat anymore. It was a focused, almost clinical determination. I needed to understand the scope of their betrayal, not just the Thanksgiving incident, but everything that had led up to it. So I started a list. Not a physical list, not yet, but a mental inventory, a catalog of every emotional cut, every dismissive gesture, every condescending remark. It was like opening a long sealed box of old wounds, and the stench of neglect and disrespect was overwhelming. I started with the early stuff. My mother, Margaret, a woman who prided herself on Southern propriety and appearances, had always viewed my single motherhood as a personal failing on her part, a stain on the family's immaculate facade. When I chose to pursue a career in something she deemed unladylike, digital marketing, rather than marrying rich and hosting charity luncheons, her disapproval was palpable. "Rachel, dear, are you sure that's a stable career?" "It sounds so." Flighty. Every achievement, every promotion was met with a backhanded compliment or a subtle suggestion that I could be doing more better. "Oh, how nice, you won an award." Your brother just closed a multi-million-dollar deal, you know. Then there was Lily. From the moment she was born, she was often treated like a peripheral character in the family drama. My parents would often forget her birthday or give her a present clearly bought last minute, something generic and impersonal, while Derek's children received extravagant gifts. Lily's accomplishments, her first steps, her early reading, her vibrant drawings were met with polite nods, while every one of my nephew's milestones was celebrated with fanfare. My mother would often remark on Lily's energy, her volume, her outspoken nature, never with warmth, but with a thinly veiled criticism that suggested Lily was somehow too much. "She's a little wild, isn't she, Rachel? Unlike your nephew, who's so calm and studious." Holiday horrors indeed. Every Christmas, Thanksgiving, or Easter felt like an emotional minefield. I'd try to contribute, to bring something, only for it to be subtly critiqued or outright ignored. One year, I spent hours making a special dessert for Christmas dinner, a family recipe I'd perfected. When I presented it, my mother simply said, "Oh, how? Rustic. I've already made my famous pecan pie, darling." The dessert went untouched. Another year, I brought Lily, dressed in a beautiful dress I'd sewn myself, to Easter brunch. My father, Arthur, glanced at Lily and commented, She certainly is active. Your brother's son sits so quietly." It was always comparison, always a subtle put down, always a reminder that I, and by extension Lily, didn't quite measure up to the idealized Monroe family image. Derek, of course, was always the golden child. His temper tantrums as a child were passion. His manipulative tendencies as an adult were business savvy. His arrogance was confidence. And my opinions, my feelings, my needs, they were routinely dismissed or overridden, especially by him. He always had to have the last word, the final say, the dominant position. Any dissent from me was met with a sneer or a condescending pat on the head. "Oh, Rachel, you're so emotional." Or, "You just don't understand how the real world works." As I mentally tallied these offenses, a pattern emerged that was as stark as it was painful. My family, collectively, treated me and Lily as second-class citizens within our own lineage. I was the inconvenient daughter, the one who didn't conform, the one who chose a different path. And Lily was the unfortunate byproduct of that choice, an extension of my perceived flaws. They saw us as problems to be managed, rather than beloved family members. The list grew longer and longer in my mind, a testament to years of emotional neglect and abuse that I had, perhaps foolishly, tolerated. But no more. The slap was the catalyst, the spark had ignited the bonfire of all these past grievances. It wasn't just rage I felt now, it was clarity. A cold, hard certainty that I had allowed this dynamic to exist for far too long. And the reckoning was coming. They had measured me and found me wanting. But now it was my turn to measure them. And they would be found wanting. Indeed, that teaching-mental list of betrayals served its purpose. It solidified my resolve. My family had spent years eroding my self-worth, making me feel small and invisible. What they didn't realize was that in doing so, they had unwittingly forged a weapon. The pain they inflicted was now the fuel for my transformation. This wasn't about petty spite. It was about reclaiming my dignity, protecting my child, and asserting my existence. The seeds of what I would come to call my redirection, rather than revenge, were planted. The first step was to cut off the oxygen supply. For years, I had been the reliable, accommodating daughter. The one who always showed up for Sunday dinners, even when I dreaded them. The one who responded politely to every loaded text in the family group chat. The one who always picked up the phone when my mother called, regardless of how busy I was. That stopped. Cold. The first Sunday my mother texted about dinner, I replied with a simple, "Lily and I have other plans. Enjoy." No apologies, no explanations, no room for negotiation. She called, of course. I let it go to voicemail, then another text, slightly more exasperated. "Rachel, this is important. Family dinner." I didn't respond. The silence was deafening, and for the first time, it felt empowering. The group chat messages piled up, questions about my absence, thinly veiled criticisms, attempts to gauge my reaction. It was like watching ants scramble when their hill is disturbed. I didn't engage. My responses became short, factual, devoid of emotion. Received. Understood. No, if they asked about Lily, I would give the bare minimum, carefully edited to convey nothing more than she was alive and well. They were used to emotional responses, to drama, to me trying to justify myself. My stoicism was a new, unsettling puzzle for them. This wasn't just about passive resistance, though. This was about building a new future for Lily and me, one where we were strong, independent, and untouchable by their toxicity. I started with my career. For too long, I had been comfortable but not challenged. I was competent but not excelling. I realized I had unconsciously held myself back, perhaps out of a lingering fear of outshining Derek or of not meeting my parents' narrow definition of success. That fear was gone, replaced by an insatiable drive. I became a sponge at work. I took on every new project, devoured every training module, volunteered for leadership roles. I sought out Mr. Hayes, my boss, a shrewd and perceptive man, and expressed my ambition. I started staying later, arriving earlier, poring over industry reports, networking aggressively. Why performance soared. I was no longer working for a paycheck. I was working for freedom, for security, for a future where Lily would never again be vulnerable to anyone's whim. My immediate goal was financial independence, not just comfort. I needed serious capital to execute the next phase of my plan. Every extra dollar I earned, every bonus, every penny I could spare, went straight into a separate savings account. No more impulse buys, no more unnecessary luxuries. I cut back on everything, living as leanly as possible, channeling every ounce of my energy into work and into being present for Lily. I explained to Lily, simply, that we were saving for big adventures, which she, with her inherent optimism, embraced wholeheartedly. It was important for her to see me thriving, to regain her own confidence. While the visible changes were in my communication and my career, the true preparations were happening internally. I was quietly researching, learning, planning. I was meticulously mapping out my escape from their shadow, not just emotionally, but structurally. I wasn't going to just walk away. I was going to dismantle their ability to ever hurt me or Lily again. They wouldn't even know what was happening until it was too late. The seeds were planted, and they were growing unseen beneath the surface. And they were about to sprout into something magnificent. My newfound, quiet defiance clearly unsettled my family. They were used to my compliance, my efforts to smooth things over. My lack of engagement was a disruption to their carefully curated dynamic. The phone calls from my mother became more frequent, each one tinged with a rising note of irritation, then thinly veiled concern, and finally outright anger. The text from the family group chat, which I still hadn't left, turned from passive-aggressive to overtly demanding. They tried to reel me back in, but I was done. It started subtly. My mother would call ostensibly to check in on Lily. "Is Lily quite all right, dear?" She seemed so. Sensitive the other day. Always framing it as Lily's issue, never Derek's. Never her own. I would give crisp, brief answers. "Lily is fine, thank you." No elaboration, no invitation for further probing. They had lost their access to our emotional lives, and it was clear they didn't like it. Then came the grander attempts. Invitations to family gatherings became more insistent, tinged with a passive-aggressive guilt. "We're having a lovely brunch on Sunday, Rachel. It would be a shame for Lily to miss out on her cousins." I'd respond with a polite but firm, "We unfortunately have a prior engagement." The rage would build in my mother's voice. Prior engagement? What could possibly be more important than family? Everything. I wanted to scream, but I kept my composure. Everything is more important than a family that condones violence against children. The real test, though, came one dreary Saturday afternoon. I was in the living room, helping Lily with a puzzle, a quiet, focused activity that had become a cherished part of her healing process, when there was a pounding on my front door. Not a polite knock, but a heavy, impatient thud that vibrated through the frame. My heart nearly stopped. I knew instinctively who it was. Lily looked up, her still sensitive eyes wide with apprehension. I walked to the door, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Taking a deep breath, I pulled it open a crack enough to see him. Derek, standing on my porch, his face set in that familiar, entitled sneer. Rachel, he began, without preamble, I need to see Lily. My blood ran cold. The sheer nerve, the utter lack of self-awareness. He wasn't there to apologize, to express regret. He was there because he felt entitled to access. To my daughter. I pushed the door open just enough to meet his gaze, my eyes as cold and hard as I could make them. You need to see Lily? I said, my voice low, dangerously calm. After you struck her across the face for talking? After you caused her to cry for days? After you made her believe she was too loud, that her very existence was an inconvenience? He actually had the audacity to sigh, as if I were being unreasonable. It was a disciplinary action, Rachel. She was out of line. She needed to be taught a lesson. Taught a lesson? My voice rose, a tremor of pure fury entering it. You don't lay hands on my child, Derek. You don't physically assault a 7-year-old and then pretend you're uncle of the year. You're no uncle to her. You forfeited that right the moment your hand made contact with her cheek. You forfeited the right to ever see her again. His face contorted in anger. Don't be ridiculous, Rachel. You're overreacting. Mom and Dad agree. You're tearing the family apart with this nonsense. That's when my mother called, as if on cue. Her name flashed on my phone screen, and I simply hit speaker before placing it on the table inside, near the door, so Derek could hear. Rachel Monroe. My mother's voice snapped, shrill and exasperated from the other end. What is this I hear? Derek says you're turning him away from the door. You're tearing this family apart with your stubbornness. It's Thanksgiving. For goodness sake, family is everything. I looked directly into Derek's shocked eyes, then back at the phone, my voice clear and steady, devoid of all emotion. Good, I said. The word hung in the air, heavy with intent. It needed to fall. I watched the realization dawn on Derek's face, a flicker of genuine shock. I then reached out without breaking eye contact and slowly, deliberately closed the door on him. Not a slam, not a violent crash, just a quiet, final click that echoed the definitive break I was making. The phone call disconnected as I did so. I walked back to Lily, her eyes wide, but a small, brave smile forming on her face. She was watching me, truly watching me, seeing me stand up for her. It was a moment of profound vindication. They had come knock, king, and I had said no, and my clear boundaries and refusal to engage drove my family to distraction. But it was Derek's unexpected visit that truly confirmed my path. His outrageous entitlement, my mother's instant gaslighting, and my quiet, firm closing of the door on them felt like a crucial step. But it was only one piece of the puzzle. The true foundation of their power, what they valued above all else, was not just social standing, but financial legacy. And I was about to shake that foundation to its very core. My late grandfather, bless his soul, was a complex man. He harbored a quiet affection for me, often slipping me extra cash for books when I was a child, and he respected my independence, even if my parents didn't. When he passed several years ago, his will stipulated a carefully structured family trust. This trust managed a significant portion of the family's inherited wealth, including a few valuable pieces of real estate and a portion of a small, but ongoing, regional business he had started. The key clause, the one I had barely registered at the time, was that access to the full benefits of the trust, including regular dividends and influence over the business's direction, was contingent upon active and substantial contribution to the collective upkeep and betterment of the Monroe family as determined by a small, independent board of trustees and, crucially, by demonstration of harmonious family relations. At the time, I'd been mildly interested, attending the occasional trustee meeting, but my primary focus was on establishing my own career and raising Lily. I figured Derek, as the favored son, would handle the bulk of it. I had no idea of the full implications. But after Thanksgiving, every clause, every legal nuance of that trust became a weapon in my arsenal. I spent weeks poring over the trust documents, researching legal precedents, and thanks to my newly elevated standing at work, arranging discreet consultations with a corporate lawyer specializing in trust law. What I discovered was fascinating, and for Derek, truly catastrophic. The trust was set up such that, while certain distributions were mandatory, a larger portion of the income and the ability to influence the business's investments required a demonstrated positive engagement in family affairs. For years, my mother and Derek had leveraged this, citing their regular family dinners, their unity, as proof of their contribution to family harmony. They'd even subtly used my absence, my rebelliousness, as a contrast to highlight their own supposed virtue. But the definition of harmonious family relations was subjective, and the trustees, though often swayed by my parents' influence, were ultimately bound by legal interpretation. And more importantly, the trust contained a specific, rarely invoked clause about conduct detrimental to a minor beneficiary. I had never pushed for my full stake. I had never needed the money badly enough to navigate the family lie politics involved in claiming it. But now it wasn't about need, it was about power, and about justice for Lily. I learned that Derek had recently invested heavily in a new risky venture, leveraging almost all his personal capital, expecting a substantial, immediate payout from the trust to cover his exposure. He was banking on my mother's continued ability to influence the trustees and his own perceived status as the family's financial future. What he didn't know was that his contribution to family upkeep had just been spectacularly negated by his actions against Lily. My lawyer helped me prepare a meticulous case. I didn't just present the Thanksgiving incident. I compiled my list, years of neglect, emotional abuse, and the systematic undermining of my role as a mother. I showed how the Monroe family's harmony was built on my silence and subjugation, and how my brother's actions were not just an isolated incident of discipline, but a pattern of controlling, abusive behavior enabled by my parents. The key was the conduct detrimental to a minor beneficiary clause. Slapping a child, especially a vulnerable 7-year-old, and then having the family matriarch and patriarch laugh about it, certainly qualified. It demonstrated a profound lack of harmonious relations and a clear disregard for the well-being of a primary beneficiary, Lily, whose future inheritance was also tied to the trust. I filed my petition with the Board of Trustees. It was a cold, formal legal document, devoid of emotion, but searing in its implications. Derek was furious. He tried to dismiss it, to say I was being hysterical. My parents tried to intervene, calling the trustees, threatening legal action themselves. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the trust stipulations were clear. The decision came swiftly. Not only was Derek's request for his substantial payout denied due to his conduct detrimental clause, but the board also voted to reevaluate his ongoing percentage of trust distributions. My stake, however, was affirmed and even increased given my demonstrated active and substantial contribution through my career advancement and responsible parenting, especially in contrast to Derek's behavior. It wasn't a complete disinheritance for Derek, not yet. But it was a massive financial blow, a public repudiation of his behavior within the family's most sacred institution. He had made a big mistake. He needed that money. And I had found the perfect legal loophole to make sure he didn't get it. I had blocked him, not just from my door, but from his anticipated inheritance. It was poetic justice. Blocking Derek's access to the family trust was a satisfying victory, a blow struck where it truly hurt them. But it was still just a piece of the puzzle, a tactical win. The deeper, more profound victory would be in truly severing the psychological ties, in dismantling any last shred of control or narrative they felt they had over me or my daughter. It was time to fully reclaim our identities. The Monroe name, for all its Southern charm and supposed prestige, had become a shroud for me, a constant reminder of the conditional love and dismissive treatment I'd endured. Every time I signed it, every time I introduced myself, it felt like I was wearing a mask, pretending to be part of a lineage that had, in fact, rejected me. Lily carried that name too, a constant, visible link to the pain she had suffered. It was time to shed it. I did my research, consulted with my lawyer again. The process was surprisingly straightforward, emotionally liberating, and deeply symbolic. One afternoon, Lily and I went to the courthouse. She was a little confused, but I explained it to her in simple terms. We're choosing a new name for us, sweetie. A name that means safety and happiness and love. A name just for us. We chose my grandmother's maiden name, a strong, resonant Irish name from my mother's side of the family that my parents ironically never spoke about due to their snobbish pride in the Munro legacy. It felt like an honor, a quiet act of defiance against my mother's snobbery, but more importantly, a beautiful new beginning for us. Changing our last name was more than a legal formality. It was an act of profound self-empowerment. It was me saying, unequivocally, I am no longer bound by your expectations, your history, or your judgment. Lily, too, seemed to blossom with the new name. It was visible in the way she carried herself, a little lighter, a little freer, as if an invisible burden had been lifted. Of course, this act of ultimate separation didn't go unnoticed. My parents and Derek saw it as the final, unforgivable insult. But they hadn't learned their lesson. Instead of reflection, they doubled down on their toxic narrative. Derek, especially, began to spread lies, fabricating stories about me to anyone who would listen. He painted me as unstable, vindictive, a bad mother who was alienating her child from her loving family. He tried to turn our mutual acquaintances, our dwindling circle of extended family, against me. For a moment, that old people-pleasing fear flickered. The fear of being misunderstood, of being ostracized. But then I looked at Lily, no longer shrinking from noise, but laughing freely, the ghost of the slap fading from her memory. And I remembered the quiet click of the door and the icy rage that had solidified into purpose. I wasn't going to let them control the narrative anymore. Silence, I had learned, was permission, and I wasn't giving them permission for anything ever again. So I decided to tell my story my way. Not to a small circle, but to the world. I sat down one evening after Lily was asleep and recorded a video. It wasn't a rant, though the temptation was immense. It was calm, factual, and deeply personal. I spoke about the Thanksgiving incident, the slap, their laughter, my initial horror, and my journey towards understanding the deeper pattern of DS, respect and abuse. I spoke about the years of criticism, the belittling, the constant feeling of never being enough. I showed the red mark on Lily's cheek in a photo I had taken that night, a stark, undeniable visual. I explained how it forced me to confront a painful truth and choose to protect my daughter, no matter the cost. I kept it anonymous at first, not mentioning names, just the stark reality of the situation. I uploaded it to a platform popular for personal narratives, shared it with Nicole and a few close, trusted friends. And then I watched. The response was overwhelming. Within hours, comments and messages flooded in. People sharing their own stories of family betrayal, of toxic dynamics, of choosing self-preservation over blood ties. The video went viral. People were outraged, empathetic, validating. They saw the truth in my words, the pain, the strength. The support was a tidal wave, a reaffirmation that I wasn't crazy, that my feelings were valid, that what they had done was truly unacceptable. Then, inevitably, the video reached my family. Outraged, Derek and my parents released their own distorted version, confirming all the details I had omitted. They exposed themselves, accusing me of defamation, of airing dirty laundry, of being unhinged. But it was too late. The initial video had garnered too much sympathy, too much understanding. Their frantic denials only served to confirm the authenticity of my original story. The world saw their true colors, not just the filtered, perfect image they presented. I had taken back my name, and with it, my voice. And this time, the world was listening. Changing our name and speaking my truth to the world were acts of necessary demolition. They cleared the ground, leveled the toxic landscape my birth family had created. But now, it was time for construction. It was time to build. Build a new life, a new legacy, and most importantly, a new family. Not one defined by blood, but by love, respect, and genuine connection. The viral video and the subsequent backlash my family faced for their defensive and self-incriminating responses changed things profoundly. It brought out a wave of unexpected support from people experiencing similar situations, but it also opened doors. People at my work, who had initially only known me as quiet and diligent, started to see a different side of my character. Mr. Hayes, my boss, was particularly impressed by my courage and resilience. He offered me a promotion, not out of pity, but out of recognition for my strength and the clear focus I now brought to my work. My career fully bloomed. With increased financial security and a newfound sense of personal freedom, I was able to dedicate myself to nurturing Lily back to her full, vibrant self. The quiet, hesitant child began to reemerge. We started therapy sessions for her and for me to process the trauma. It was a long road, but with consistent support and a home filled with unconditional love, Lily's laughter returned louder and freer than ever before. She no longer stifled her excitement. She embraced it, and I encouraged every joyful burst of energy she had. But the most profound change was in how we defined family. For years, I had chased the approval of a family that didn't truly see me. Now, I turned my attention to cultivating genuine connections. Nicole, my best friend, was the anchor. She'd been there through every single step, listening, validating, and cheering me on. She became an honorary aunt to Lily, her empathy and unwavering support a constant source of strength. Our circle began to grow. Other single moms from Lily's school, colleagues from work who admired my story, even some distant relatives who, having seen my video and my birth family's reactions, reached out in quiet support, sharing their own experiences of being marginalized. These were people who understood what it meant to be chosen, to be truly seen and valued for who you are, not for who you're supposed to be. We started new traditions. Our first Friendsgiving without my Monroe family was a revelation. It wasn't about forced smiles or passive-aggressive comments. It was about warmth, genuine laughter, and delicious food shared with people who truly cared. My apartment, which had often felt like a refuge, transformed into a hub of joyous activity. Lily helped me bake pies, her small hands dusted with flour, her singing filling the kitchen. The table was full of mismatched chairs, lively conversation, and a palpable sense of belonging. I distinctly remember a moment during that first Friendsgiving. Lily, completely herself, was excitedly telling a story about school, her voice rising with enthusiasm. Not a single person flinched. Instead, her audience of aunts and uncles leaned in, captivated, asking questions, encouraging her. Nicole shot me a knowing smile across the table. In that moment, watching Lily shine, completely uninhibited and adored, I knew. This was family. This was what it was always supposed to be. The final sequence of the documentary would definitely capture this feeling. A camera panning across a table laden with food, but more importantly, with happy, open faces. Lily, seated proudly, not on two cushions to reach the table, but as an equal, her bright eyes sparkling with unburdened joy. The delightful cacophony of multiple conversations, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. The warmth radiating from every corner of the room, a stark contrast to the cold, stiff formality of my parents' home. It was noisy, yes, but it was the most beautiful, comforting noise I had ever heard. I had built my own family, piece by loving piece, and it was infinitely stronger and more beautiful than anything I had ever left behind. Now been a year since that Thanksgiving. A year since the slap, a year since I walked out, a year since I truly began to reclaim my life. Lily just celebrated her 8th birthday, and it was a joyful, noisy celebration with her. Real family, the one we built. She's thriving in school, her confidence soaring, and her laughter is a constant, melodious presence in our home. The scar on her spirit has healed, replaced by the resilience and joy of a child who feels utterly loved and safe. As for my birth family, their lives have unfolded in ways that, while not my direct doing, are directly tied to the choices they made and the vacuum created by my departure. Derek, the golden child, the presumed heir to all things Monroe, has spiraled. The denial of his expected trust payout came at the worst possible time, exposing his over-leveraged business ventures. I've heard through the grapevine from the few loyal family friends who still discreetly keep me informed that he's struggling financially. His arrogance, once a veneer of success, now just seems pathetic. He's lost several key clients, his temper making him unreliable, and his wife, tired of his increasingly abrasive behavior, has even threatened to leave him. He once held himself up as the peak of success, the example I should follow. Now his carefully constructed life seems to be crumbling, a direct consequence of his own actions and his family's enabling. He wanted to teach Lily a lesson, but he seems to be learning a very harsh one about consequences himself and my parents. Margaret and Arthur, they live in that large, silent house, the one that used to echo with their manufactured propriety. They call often, I hear, desperate for some connection, some control. They leave voicemails trying to sound casual, then increasingly agitated, sometimes even pleading, but I never return their calls. My silence is not vengeful. It's simply protective. They created a profound emptiness in their lives when they chose tradition and appearances over compassion and genuine love. They had their perfect Thanksgiving that year, full of their comfortable lies and carefully constructed facades, but it was only perfect for a fleeting moment, without me there to absorb their condescension, without Lily there to be their convenient target. The attention turned inward. The comfortable dynamic they built on my marginalization collapsed. The people they chose to keep, the ones who enabled their toxicity, became their entire world, and it turns out that world is rather lonely. They wanted to teach my daughter a lesson. They wanted to show her that deference and silence were more important than her voice, her joy, her very spirit. They wanted to instill in her the same fear of stepping out of line that they had tried for years to instill in me, but I was the one who taught them a lesson they won't forget. Even if they pretend they don't understand it, that blood isn't thicker than toxic water, that true family is built on respect and love, not control and derision, that when you push people past their breaking point, when you betray them deeply and laugh at their pain, you risk losing everything, and sometimes losing so mean is the real punishment. They lost me. They lost Lily. And they lost any pretense of a happy, functioning family they might have once held dear. They wanted to teach my daughter a lesson, but I was the one who taught them one they won't forget.